journey. So alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So we're gonna really talk about just kind of troubleshooting through those steps. For those of you guys that were here two presentations ago, we kind of laid out the timeline and action steps to take towards losing body fat. It seemed like at that time people were that was their primary goal. We know we had individuals that were in the perimenopause, menopausal age, right? So in those that we consider child rearing, so before they hit perimenopause, right? So I'm going to make sure that I touch on those. I'm assuming that some of you guys might be here. And then there will be one third and last final section to this presentation in which we will kind of go more into, okay, now that I've conquered the first step, how do I move forward with it? Okay. So, all right. So one of the most common mistakes that we see when people are starting their fitness journey and nutrition journey, right, as dietitians, and specifically, I specialize in body composition, right? So lowering the body fat or increasing the muscle mass in one person or both, right? So whenever we see that is we see that they have either not started off with the right starting point, right? So they haven't determined either their weight or their body fat percentage. We always tell people that whatever they want to improve, that's what they should measure, right? So if you want to improve your scale number, your number on the scale, then you use that as your measurement tool. However, if you want to improve your body fat percentage, how much squishy stuff you actually have, on you, that's what you should measure, right? So you should use the most accurate method that you can find, afford, or of those means. And nowadays they're very, very affordable. In my practice, we use the skin fold caliper method, which is that little kind of like pinchy tool that you see right there. It's the second most accurate after the DEXA scan. The DEXA scan is what we call the gold standard. So just because it has the least amount of error in it. Okay. Now, if you're just starting, if you're just basing it on what you're like, Carla, I just want to, reduce that number on the scale. Make sure you take into account the different things that can affect that number, because that number is the reflection or the sum of four different types of weight. Your lean mass, which is your muscles, your organs, your tissue, everything that you're made out of, right? So if your muscles increase, right, so will this number on the scale, right? Now, also your fat mass. So that squishy stuff that we're trying to get rid of, right? So that will also be part of the, what's in that scale number. Okay. Water weight. We as human beings were made up of like 60 to 70% water. So if our hydration status increases or decreases, that number on the scale will also increase or decrease. And there are a ton of things that can make the human body either retain water weight or lose it, right? Some carbohydrates can help us retain water weight, right? Whether we are sweating or not, right? Like if you sweat a lot or not, that's like something that we take into account. Now, and we got to take into account those fluctuations, right? Now, remember, being dehydrated is not ideal for the human body, because if we are too dehydrated, we could essentially die, right? So a lot of the times when I teach on carbohydrates that hold water weight, just there are some carbohydrates that don't hold water weight. It's not that those carbohydrates are better than the ones that hold water weight. It's just that they serve a different purpose. We need to, like I say, maintain a specific amount of water balance inside of us. Otherwise, we die. So don't be afraid of eating those carbohydrates, right? Just know that, hey, if I do eat a little bit more of them, the number on that scale will go up. Okay. The best example I can give on that is whenever we are around like Thanksgiving, vacation and break, a lot of the foods we consume during, the Thanksgiving season, the crust of the pie, stuffing, mashed potatoes, and so forth, right? They tend to have us hold a bit more of that water weight. And last but not least, the last weight that's on that scale is your bone mass and your bone weight. That one really can't increase. Okay, there's only two times in the lifespan of a woman where she can actually increase what's called her bone density, and that is in puberty and during the time of her pregnancy. Those are the only two times. Outside of those two times, your bone density naturally declines. Okay, with age. So we really want to hold on. We don't want to lose that one. Now, if you are a new trainee, we classify new trainees as people that have been deconditioned, meaning they might have worked out in high school and now they're in their mid 30s and now picking it up again, for the second time around. But a long period of time kind of went by without them working out, right? Or somebody that never worked out before and now is starting to do resistance training, weightlifting, running, whatever that may be, right? The reason for that is because there is a turnaround time frame where the body's getting used to this recovering process. the recovery processing of repairing the tissue, the muscle that was slightly torn during exercise. It's called protein synthesis. Okay. Now, this process requires water. So a lot of the times when we start working out, your water weight will increase because of this repair process. We see this a lot. I see this in my practice with women, especially at the beginning of the years with New Year's resolutions, where they haven't worked out for a year. They're like, this year's going to be my year. They eat very well, right? And they work out very hard, but they don't take into account that this phenomenon is going to happen. And at the end of the month, they haven't lost weight, or that number on the scale has actually gone up from their repair process. And now they get very discouraged. So remember that, make sure you take into account all of the different things that can make that number on the scale fluctuate. Another thing is using biometric impedance devices. So I'm going to show you a few, and you guys might actually have seen some of these. Some of them you will find trainers at the gyms use them. Some nutrition shops use them to kind of tell you, hey, like this is where your fat mass is. This is how much body fat you have. All these are great. However, your ability to throw them off is very easily. All of these function through what's called an electrical current. So the handheld device ones, right? By the way, the handheld device ones, the electrical current that is sent through one and the other is only strong enough to measure your upper extremities. It's not strong enough to go through your whole body. So the body fat that will be measured through that handle is just your arms, your upper body, like your chest area. Okay. Now, just like any electrical current, if you guys know anything about electricity, right? Water conducts electricity. So if you are overly hydrated or dehydrated, the number on that reading will be off, right? So for example, if you're dehydrated, the current is going to have a harder time going from one into the other. And the device is going to read that your body fat is higher than what it may actually be. On the opposite hand, if you just drank a bunch of water, right, the device will tell you that you have less body fat than you actually may have. And if you're doing this from one reading to the next and you're hydrated in one and dehydrated on the other, it might tell you that your body fat went way up, right? Or went way down. You're like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem accurate, right? Like I said, these devices can be used properly, but you just need to be very careful with maintaining the same hydration status. So usually for people that are using these devices, especially the scale right here, I recommend that you do it at the same time, usually in the morning after using the restroom, if you haven't drank any water, right? Because we're trying to adjust for as many things as possible in order to keep like a constant reading and a consistent environment for this reading to happen. Another one, so the scale, by the way, will only measure your lower extremities, right? The electrical current sent on those is only strong enough to go from like up until your mid hip area and down below. There are some devices that can go through the whole body, and as you guys can see, these are like the scales that have the handles, because the electrical current will go from one end up to your arms and then down to the other. Okay, these are the ones that are being used for whole body readings, but just like all the other ones, right? It can also be thrown with being overly hydrated or dehydrated. So make sure if you're using one of them, you're using them properly. And whichever method you decide to use, make sure you're using the same method. For example, if you use the skinful calipers in one method and then one of these scales the next, they're not the same type of measurement tool. So combining the results of one to the other, it would be very, very inaccurate. I actually have seen some people use this, right? Or use a different type of scale. So they might go to, let's say, their trainer at their gym has, a handheld device, and then the next month they use a scale. Well, that's an inaccurate, an inaccurate tool, because we can't compare two different tools. Okay. So that's another thing that I see people kind of be a thing that they struggle with, given that they are using different measurement tools, right? And then they're like, well, my body fat went up, super high this month. Well, we want to make sure that we stay consistent with the type of tools that we're using for measuring. Okay. Next, let's talk about the scale. Now, the scale, like I said, is actually a really good tool if we know how to use it properly. If you are a woman that is what we call child-rearing age, your hormones will have a different effect on that scale number, and I'll go and wind up to just a second, than a woman who is in perimenopause and menopause, okay? So let me tell you a bit of the difference as to why, and then I'm going to work my way backwards on how this is going to affect the scale number, okay? Women who have not reached perimenopause, so these are the women that we consider, after the, hit puberty, that are child-rearing ages, okay? Your hormones will fluctuate depending on what time of the month and what part of the cycle you're in. In the part of our cycle where estrogen is the highest, and that happens, twice during our menstrual cycle, estrogen, high levels of estrogens cause water retention. That's what we feel bloated right before our periods, right? And some of us actually, may actually feel heavier, right? Like we are struggling to walk. We feel like we have more weight on ourselves. It's because we are. Okay. Now, your body naturally gets rid of this water retention as estrogen comes down low again, and you have, your cycle. So during those days, during those weeks, during those times, the water weight will be higher, which will make the number on the scale be higher. So if you're a woman using the scale, it is not accurate to compare week 1, week 2 to week 3 and week 4, because your hormones fluctuate very differently each week depending on what part of your cycle you're in. A better way to use the number on the scale for this is to compare. So let's say we're using January, okay, January up until now, right? A better way to use this is you use week 1 of January to week 1 of February to week 1 of March. And then week 2 of January to week 2 of February and to week 3 of March. And week 3 and week 4 and so on, right? Because then your body will have been around the same kind of fluctuation. So you're comparing those peaks to each other rather than high estrogen and then low estrogen, because 1 week your weight's going to be higher and the other week your weight's going to be lower because of that estrogen fluctuation. And like I said, estrogen, higher levels of estrogen cause water retention. Okay. Now, if you are in perimenopause, depending on which phase you are on, this will actually have a different impact. Okay. So perimenopause is divided into 2 phases, early and late. If you're in the early stages of perimenopause, your estrogen actually has not started to decline. So you will be behaving much like the childbearing woman, okay? Now, if you are in, by the way, the only way you can know this is if you go to your gynecologist and they test your estrogen and progesterone levels and they tell you where you are at. They can actually tell you by doing this, okay? Now, as you start moving through this early phase into the late phase, it's in the late phase where estrogen starts to decline, right? So lower levels of estrogens will mean that you're retaining less water weight, right? So at that point, you can but as if any of you guys have actually been through the stage, you will see that you'll start missing your cycle some months, but have it consecutively other months. Like you might go month 1, 2, and 3 be okay, and then month 4 you have it, and then month 5 you don't, month 6 you don't, month 7 you don't, and then it comes back again, right? So that's why that can be a little tricky to use just the number on the scale, right? For perimenopause women, I highly recommend the DEXA scan method, because the DEXA scan will make sure that it doesn't account for that, but it will also show you your lean mass. Okay. Out of the other ways of measurements, the DEXA scan is the one that I use in my practice for perimenopause and menopause women, because there's so many things, so many factors that affect it, that is really hard for us to control without, a more exact form of measurement. Not only this, but usually in perimenopause, that's when we start seeing the decline of lean mass of muscle, right? Because of a lot of things, inactivity, versus inactivity in terms of resistance training, not eating enough protein, right? All these other things that make it kind of decline. And the bigger sign of this, by the way, if you start noticing that body fat is accumulating in that midsection, that's usually an indication that the metabolic rate, or your basal metabolic rate, your metabolism starts to slow down. Your metabolism does not necessarily slow down because of age. It slows down because as we age, we lose muscle mass. So it's the loss of muscle mass that is directly tied to the lower metabolism. We can counterbalance that by increasing your lean mass, which you can do at any part of your life, right? You can keep your metabolism running quite high, okay? For the menopausal woman, the same. Now, the menopausal woman has pretty much lost all of her estrogen, right? So like I said, depending on where that menopause or postmenopause period you're in, your body will be behaving very differently, right? So once you have lost your cycle for one whole entire year, 12 consecutive months, you are considered to be in menopause, right? At this point, your water weight doesn't fluctuate. okay? Because unless you're undergoing hormone replacement therapy, HRT, then that's a whole different story, right? But if you haven't done this actually becomes very flat. The biggest indicator at this point of fat loss or fat gain now becomes your lean mass. So that's why for those women, I actually also use only the DEXA scan as a form of measurement, as a form of tracking progress. Okay, so that's another mistake that perimenopausal women start using perimenopausal and menopausal women start using the scale when it's a very inaccurate form to track for all the different changes that are going on. Right. That's why a lot of them feel discouraged and they're like, what's even the point? I'm just going to do whatever I want. Right. And because of that, they tend to, like I said, feel discouraged. And it's not that they're doing it wrong. It's just they're just using the wrong measurements and the wrong tools. Okay. So that would be, we want to make sure that we're tracking properly for whatever reproductive age you are in. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, going into, let's actually track our progress. If you guys remember this picture, I showed it in that first presentation that I did, because based on this, you can determine where your body fat percentage started and where you want it to end, right? Now, the reason why we do that is because we want to keep in mind a realistic time frame, right? So for example, I gave the example last time. If let's say you were starting at the 40% body fat percentage starting point and you wanted to end at 20% body fat, can very much be doable, right? But if you do that, right, in a person that does not have a clinical condition, because there are some clinical conditions that can affect what we call fat metabolism or your ability to lose body fat, okay? But in a person that doesn't have any of those, a normal rate of fat loss will be anywhere between 0.7 to 1.2 per month, right? Depending at the beginning, if you have more body fat to lose, it will be easier to lose more at the beginning, right? Okay. But let's say on average, every month you're consistently losing that 1.2. So let's make that calculation. So the difference between 40 and 20 is 20. So I'm going to use my handy dandy calculator if you guys want to go along with me. And I'm going to divide this by 1.2, given that, you're consistently using this in the months. It will take you about 16.6 months. So roughly over like a year and 4 months, closer to a year and a half, right? This is very important. So come month 1 and month 2, and you compare your measurements, you're like, oh man, the number on the scale hasn't moved, but I'm down by, 1% body fat or 2% body fat. Awesome. We're moving in the right directions. Now we just finished 2 months or 1 month, right? Depending on where you are, out of those, 16, 17 months, right? So remember, we got to keep going and just kind of keeping, your eyes on the prize, right? Your eyes on the end goal. It's going to help you keep motivated. It's like, hey, I just got to do is lose a little bit each month. Okay. A lot of the times, some of us, depending if we have fallen into what we call the diet culture, like we've done different diets throughout the years. I've done and been there. This is why I became a dietitian, because I really got pissed off at people lying to me about how fat was actually lost. So I was like, let me go ahead and find out for myself. Okay. So the reason why we want to track on a monthly basis, right, is because we want to make sure we're doing it in a healthy way, because there is such thing as losing too much body fat too fast, right? If you lose body fat too fast, that's when people end up with like saggy skin, right? Now, the saggy skin can come from two different, as an end result of two different things. One is you're losing body fat too fast and you're not giving time for the skin to adhere back to the muscle, okay? Or two, there was enough excess body fat, right, in between the muscle and the skin, where now the fat cells no longer have fat in them, but the fat cells are still there, right? With those, usually the only way to remove fat cells that are there, but they're not filled up with fat, is through a surgical procedure, because unfortunately, the only cells that our bodies don't get rid of are fat cells, right? Now remember, everything that our bodies does is, based out of a survival mechanism. So it's not like, it's like, oh, dang it, I want to, why is this happening to me? There's a biological reason, if you're trying to reach something and trying to look at something. So I just got a question for somebody that says, is there an ideal body fat percentage if you're thinking of trying to get pregnant, maybe an overall share? Okay, cool. So yes, so if you're trying to get pregnant, there is the ideal body weight range, right, It will actually depend on your age, right? Because your childbearing range, if you're trying to get pregnant. We see, and for your height and your weight that you gave me, love, I'm sorry, for the age, yeah, yeah. Um, you're actually I would want you to increase your lean mass a bit more, right? So for anybody that's 5'11", we have what's called, and for any height, by the way, we have an ideal body weight range, right? Meaning in this, range of weight, we can consider that your body is working healthy in order to conceive, right? If the female body does not have enough calories roaming through her body will deem her body not fit for conception. Okay. So, and because of that, I'm like, well, I'm barely trying to keep you alive, let alone bring another life into you, right? So this is a lot of the times when we see menstrual cycle dysfunctions, where people will start losing their periods or getting lighter periods, right? Because your bodies are saying, hey, I don't have enough to keep the life tissue alive in you, okay? So for a 5'11" woman, let me do a quick calculation so I can give you some tangible stuff to walk away with. I would want you to be anywhere between 155 if you're 5'11", and in the age that you gave me, between 155 at your lowest up until 170, depending on how much lean mass you have, right? So we can track that, right? But yeah, if you have any specific questions, remember now, just because somebody is in this body weight range, their body fat percentage will actually be dependent what's deemed healthy based on their age, right? So because of that, usually for women that are like in their 20s and 30s, and I'd say up until their mid 40s, a healthy weight range is somewhere between 22 and 24. 20 to 24. Okay. After that, it's yes, yes. Yes, that's right. You're gonna take in protein when you're living heavier. Protein and carbohydrates, I would increase those too. Okay. Carbohydrates have what we call the protein sparing effect, meaning carbohydrates actually protect your muscle in the lean mass that you're building. So your body registers like, hey, I have enough energy to do everything I need to do, right? Yeah. So once again, going back to the skin adhering to your muscle. Like I said, surgical removal may be needed for the other areas. Otherwise, like I said, that skin will and can, you're very welcome, can adhere back into it, properly. Now, if you're losing too much body fat at first, right? This is where I have seen some of my patients, they're very dedicated and they come in and they're like little, I'm like, hey, you're gonna get out of this when you put in it, and they do, right? And at the end of the month, they're losing 2 or 3% body fat, which may be too much at the beginning, right? And I'll say, hey, we need to slow down. I love that you're losing this much. This lets me know that your body is capable, meaning there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong metabolically with you, right? Like you can move forward, but we need to slow down for the sake of doing this the healthy way. Okay. Another thing that gets affected with losing weight too fast is your visual representation of yourself. This is how people can often end up with what we call body dysmorphia. And we see this like at an extreme case happening with people that undergo like bariatric surgery, because they go themselves from seeing themselves in one way to now see themselves shrink overnight, and mentally they have not adapted to that, right? That's why it's really, really important that as our bodies are changing, we're watching our changes kind of happen through that, because that registers in our brain in a different way. And there's actually some neurotransmitters that get released, dopamine, serotonin, and all that stuff, that help you, kind of be okay and adjust to those changes. So for your mental health, we also want to make sure we're listening to this at a good rate. Okay. So that's when we need to kind of slow down the fat loss. Right now, when do we need to speed up? So if we see, for example, that your fat loss is like a 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, and we know there's not an underlying medical condition that's stopping you from doing that, then we might see like, hey, okay, usually when that happens, and I'll kind of touch back on this later on, is when people are consuming too many calories and they're not using them out, they're not expending them as much as they think they are. So usually that's the main problem. And that may not be their fault. It's not because they may not want to, it's just that they may be unaware of how many calories are in a certain thing, right? So that's when we dive, we usually in my practice, we dive deep into label reading and analyzing foods, whether it be at restaurants, when they go out, like cocktails and stuff like that. let's go to the next one. Okay, so adjusting, like I said, applying whether to slow down or speed up, right? So, by the way, usually a sign that women are losing too much lean mass, too much muscle mass too fast is if the number on the scales goes down too quickly. Okay. The reason for that is that when we lose muscle mass, we also lose the water in that muscle. Remember, we're made out of 60 to 70% water. Not only that, but if a woman has, ran in the past and kind of any exercise, she will hold something in those muscle tissues called glycogen. Okay, glycogen is a form of a sugar, a form of a carbohydrate that our muscles use in order to keep working, contracting and releasing. Okay. When you lose this muscle mass, you will lose the glycogen in it, you will lose the water in it, right? And you will lose the muscle in and of itself. That's why if any of you guys have ever done any weight loss program, like a weight loss clinic, like back in the day, they were like Lindora, Jenny Craig and all that stuff, they would put women in to do a lot of cardio, because doing a lot of cardio is one of the easiest ways to lose lean mass. So they would lose body weight on the scale very rapidly, right? However, their metabolism would also slow down very drastically because of the lack of lean mass. So this is one of the reasons why we don't encourage the loss of muscle mass so quickly, because it affects the metabolism in and of itself. Okay. With excess skin, so let's say you do end up with a bit of excess skin. So usually for people that we recommend that, hey, try to lose as much of this weight, the natural way as possible. And then later on, when you're down into like this 22%, body fat, 20% body fat, I've had patients that lose quite a bit, and we do end up with the loose skin because there's like tissue, there's fat tissue that no longer has fat in it, but the tissue is still there because the cells don't go away, right? And then at that point, we can talk about different procedures where they will go ahead and scrape that tissue away and make sure the skin goes back. Now, careful with this, because your body can always make fat cells again. Okay, so if we start over consuming food again, this part was, the skin or the fats underneath that skin will, start to grow again, right? And the increase of calories, right, can happen in any way. It can happen through liquid food, through solid food. That's why we see a lot of the times that people who undergo bariatric surgery and they've never learned to adjust their, nutritional habits, they end up regaining the weight because calories can make their way in very, very easily, even through small amounts of food like chocolate, liquid calories, and stuff like that. Okay. So excess fat cells, like I said, the only way we can remove those is through a surgical procedure. So there are plenty of them out there that are really, really safe, but we really do encourage, the removal of the fat cell only after they are empty, if you want to look at it that way. Okay, so what happens if you measure yourself again? So let's say you started in January with us, right? And you measured February and March, you're like, Carla, I only lost like 0.1% each time. I don't feel like I'm going anywhere, right? Okay. The first thing that we usually walk our patients through this, and we usually catch this in the first month, not in the second month, right? Because we want to make sure that we're moving in the right direction, is we want to make sure that they truly understand how their bodies can be in a calorie deficit, and understanding what a calorie deficit is. A lot of times people are like, well, calorie deficit is, less calories in, more calories out. It's actually more complicated than that, right? This is true if you have not an underlying clinical condition, but if you have perimenopause, menopause, if you have Hashimoto's, if you have hypothyroidism, if you have diabetes, right? You have a condition that affects the metabolism, PCOS, right? So all of these conditions, they actually need a different way because the human body is not working as it normally should or would, right? So with that, there are other ways in which we can achieve fat loss, but it may not be as easily as calories in and calories out, usually because those conditions, there's usually something that has been altered with the way that the body can either process carbohydrates, fats, or proteins, right? So for example, let me give you an example of a diabetic person. A diabetic person usually has something called what we call insulin resistance, okay? Which means their bodies cannot process, metabolize, break down, or absorb carbohydrates normally, right? Because of that, let's say they're, at 1,700 calories, they are a calorie deficit. If they eat mostly carbohydrates on the 1,700 calories, they're actually going to be storing most of that as body fat because their body doesn't know what to do with it, right? That's why it's not as easy as it seems, right? That's what we usually walk them through a professional, a dietitian, where they'll explain to them like, hey, this is what's going on, and this is how we're going to go about it. Okay. Also, we want to explain to them what a calorie maintenance is and what a calorie surplus is. How are the extra calories making their way in, and what impact is that having into their day-to-day lives, right? We see this with people that want to have a little bit of fun on the weekends. We want to make, and they're not taking into account the excess or the extra calories are coming in through the weekend, so that may be actually affecting their progress, right? Accuracy of data apps. So some nutritional data apps are not as accurate as they may seem. One of my patients, when she started with me, well, this has actually happened multiple times. She was using a nutritional data app that was telling her that the app was telling her that she was consuming around 1,300 calories, when in fact she was consuming closer to 1,900. So she was nowhere near a calorie deficit, right? She was actually, at either maintenance or a surplus sometimes. So be very careful and to know the accuracy where those apps are getting their information from. If you guys are wondering which data app I like to use Chronometer. As of right now, it's the most accurate that I've seen out there. So yeah, I would recommend that one. I have a question coming through. So I like the Chronometer app for tracking the macronutrients. The 1 gram of protein for your body weight is true if you're working out 4 days a week or more. Okay, below that, your body doesn't need as much protein because you're not working out as much, right? It makes sense. The more you work out, the more you're tearing down your lean tissue, your lean mass, the more protein you need to recover, right? So yeah, so that's what I would recommend. That the 1 gram is good if you're working out 4 days of more of activity. Yes, great questions. So another thing, right, it's to make sure that, let's say you learn the hard way month 1 that, things were not going the right, just keep tracking, right? These monthly measurements, right, that you do, they're not to tell you how much you failed or, they're just to give you feedback. Hey, we're going in the right direction, right? If you're not, then we just need to, tweak a few things and keep going, right? So don't let, those measurement dates deter you, because if something is not going right, then we got to do something about it, right? Okay, so other common mistakes that I've seen when people start their nutrition journey, fitness journey, is the most common mistake, right, is that we as human beings, right, because our bodies are made for survival, we think we're consuming less calories than what we actually do, and we think we use more calories than when we actually use, right? So let's make a poll. Let's say on a 1 hour of resistance training, weightlifting, how many calories do you guys think we burn? You could send that in the chat. How many calories? 600, 700, 800. So we actually use anywhere between 152 up to 200, and 200, 220, that's like a leg day. That is extremely hard. We actually don't burn that many calories. What happens in where resistance training actually wins in terms of calorie burn? I know, right? You're like, no, what do you mean? I thought, like I sweat and it hurts more than that, right? But this is to show you guys that we naturally think that we use more than what we actually do, right? So where resistance training, where weightlifting actually causes a really big calorie burn, is as a result of the repair process. The repair process of your muscle tissue requires calories, requires energies, right? So over the span of the next 2 days, you might actually end up using around the same amount of calories, 150 to 200 calories, to repair that tissue. So overall, you do get a 600 calorie burn if you work out hard enough, okay? Just not in that one same day, okay? Not one same hour of exercise, okay? That's why for those people that want to do body fat, we recommend resistance training as our main form of exercise. Okay. Another thing that we see is consistency, right? People are not, consistently with what they're doing. Like week one, they might, exercise one day and, not pay attention to their food. And week two, they're paying attention to their food, but they're not working out. Week three, they're doing both, right? So not being consistent, right, enough with, or, kind of going off the deep end. And by the way, this is normal, guys. This is actually how change actually does happen. So we've got to find a way for somebody to change, right, make or apply changes that they're comfortable applying and stay consistently with them. That's why these journeys take, usually going back to calculating how long it would take you, usually, a year up to a year and a half, 2 years, depending on how much body fat you have to lose. Okay. So that's why, that's what we, knowing that's like, oh, okay, I'm down to, month 3 out of, 14 or 15. I'm going in the right direction, right? Because you can affirm and kind of reassure yourself that this is a process that's going to, be relatively slow but consistent, and you will get there. Okay. Changing too much at once. We naturally, as human beings, we don't like change. Change is very hard on us naturally. Okay. This usually, I usually say this to my patients that think they can go cold turkey on things. Very few people can actually go cold turkey on things. The research on that shows us that small changes over time win or are more applicable and therefore more successful than trying to go cold turkey and say, hey, I'm never going to drink wine again, right? I actually had a patient and I said, hey, I'm just here to give you the data. We're going to do whatever you do. And she's like, yep, I'm going to go turkey. She used to drink, large amounts of wine right throughout the week. And I said, hey, your calories are just racking out because of the wine, right? And just giving her feedback. She says, I'm going to go cold turkey next week. And a whole year passed. And I said, hey, I think this cold turkey thing, it's not really working for you, right? Because if you, in fact, could do it, you would have already done it, right? And that wasn't me being, harsh with her. It was me being hey, realistically, this is what the data shows us, right? This is what we call it an evidence-based practice, right? Because we apply what actually does work. Let's just focus on changing one thing, right? This week, let's reduce our drinking by 1 glass, right? And over time, in the same amount, that year span, the next year that we spend, she actually achieved her goal. So, like I said, this process, it usually is a very humbling process. By the way, this is another reason why many people don't actually go through it, because they really get to know themselves and their tendency throughout the process, right? With our patients, that's one of the reasons why we're so gentle with them and we're so empathetic, because we realize that some of them may have never thought about like, hey, the reason why I overconsume is because I saw my mom do it when she was a kid, right? Or my parents used to reward me with food. I had to change that, right? As a kid, my parents would be like, good job, Carly. You did well on your homework, assignments, tests, whatever. Here's the lollipop, here's some candy, right? So those are the things that I had to reanalyze and work through, right? And have a new way of rewarding myself. I love rewarding myself with a massage now, right? Like I can give myself like subscriptions, whatever, right? Like something that just doesn't reward me with food, right? So once again, just knowing what to change and how to change and slowly and gradually is always going to be the best way to go about it. Other forms of tracking, okay, visual representations. This is huge, usually for my patients that are not within the same state or geographic region where I can test them, okay? I'm in California, and I definitely see a lot of patients on the East Coast. We take monthly pictures, right, front, side, and back, because through that, we can actually see their bodies adjusting, right? I love back pictures, right, taking a picture of your back, because I usually tell my patients, you can't suck in the back fat, right? So it usually gives us a really good representation of what's going on. However, these visual changes take about 3 to 5 months to appear. So a lot of times you're like, but I don't look different, right? Or I'm barely seeing, noticing the difference. Like, I know, we're going to get there. That's why this 17-month journey, we're on month 3, hang on, it's coming, okay? So being patient and knowing when the changes might happen in the future that will actually take place. The objective, right? So kind of keeping the, like I said, the eyes on the prize, knowing what to do and how to accurately track it, right? It's going to be a very important way of tracking it. Body fat measurements, really, really, really good way of tracking, right? Weight on the scale, as long as you're doing properly for your what we call reproductive age, right? Can be very, very good. Setting SMART goals, right? So we know SMART goals are specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're relevant, and then time-based, right? So specific, rather, some people, when I usually meet with my patients at the beginning, they might say, well, I just want to lose weight and, eat and feel better. Okay. well, how much weight and what does feel better look like to you, right? So that's when I usually is it the weight on the scale or is it the body fat percentage? Because you want to change how you look in the mirror, right? So we look and we go through that measurable, right? How are we going to measure this? A lot of the times people that have done this in the past are like, well, can I do my inch measurements? You sure can. Remember though, however, in your waist, in that midsection, it will grow, it'll distend or come back depending on how much food, how much water. So if one day you have to pee when you're doing it and your belly's bigger, it's going to give you a greater inch measurement than if you have just used the bathroom and haven't had anything to eat, right? So that's what make sure that, that is a good measure to use what is relevant to your goal, right? Attainable, right? Is it attainable, right? Thankfully, I don't think I've ever had anybody not have an attainable goal. Even those with medical conditions, if I have had some patients that we need to introduce medication for medical reasons, right? And we definitely would do use them. But like I said, we go through all the forms of like, is it really necessary? Is it relevant to what we're trying to achieve, right? And then the time frame, it's very, very important, right? Relevant, is some people, hey, I want to lose body fat. Well, then measuring the scale is not a relevant way to do it, right? So because that's not what I'm trying to change. Reminding yourself, this one's huge, right? So once again, determining your goal is going to be really, really, really important in order to track of how long it's going to take back, right? Of those stages of, hey, hang in there, right? You might have started like 40%, and in 5 months you're at 35. In the next 5, you're at 30, right? You're moving, you're getting closer to your goal. But reminding yourself of this overall time frame is really, really important so that you're patient with yourselves, right? You don't get frustrated and so forth. Okay. Now, a lot of the times people are like, Carl, well, when should I, there are some people that say, hey, like I want to do this on my own. And you definitely can, by the way, right? So I want to say out of all my years in my fitness journey, the only time I hired a nutrition coach. They were called nutrition coaches back in the day. Back in the day, we didn't have dietitians in private practice as much as we do now. And even then, out of the total US population, by the way, guys, only about 8% of us are in private practice. The rest of dietitians usually become dietitians and end up in the hospital and clinic setting. So this is another reason why the general public usually does not have access to a registered dietitian, is because of that. Okay. And then we get into the whole insurance question, then that's even why, some dietitians choose not to move into private practice. But things are changing, thankfully, because our medical system is realizing that nutrition has a lot to do with preventing and curing disease, right? So this is changing. But if you feel lost, if you feel like, no matter what you try, nothing is working, that's when I would say, you should maybe reach out to a qualified individual to help you. Okay. Like I said, I think the last time, and I'm going to go back, I actually I was in the bodybuilding world for a very, very long time. And the only time where I hired a nutrition coach was during that time frame. So at that time I was already like a 20% body fat, and she helped me go here. And I fluctuate in between these two throughout the year. So usually in the winter I'm here because I'm trying to put a little bit of muscle mass, and usually in the summer so I bring myself down to here. But I did hire her for like a good year and a half because I wanted to understand, the different mechanisms. And even then they were, nutrition coaches are great, but they're not dietitians. So she couldn't give me the answers to a lot of the scientific questions that like, how does fat loss actually happen? You need the physiology behind it, right? Like I'm a science geek at heart. So she wasn't able to explain that to me. So that's when I decided to go back for my master's and become one so that I could explain to my patients if that's what they wanted to know, right? Because I want them to know the why and how behind everything that they do. If you have been diagnosed with a medical condition, like I said, there's some medical conditions out there that do affect the metabolism. So at that point, I love to tell my patients that, hey, not, a lot of different roads lead to Rome. So just because one person achieved it one way, that may not be the way that you can achieve it. And that's okay, because we can take another road. Okay. So if you feel like you have tried many times over the years and nothing has worked, we often call being stuck in the diet culture, right? By the way, guys, all diet works, but all diets don't work at the same time, right? They all work because they essentially put you in a calorie deficit, but the reason why they don't work is because they're not sustainable over a long period of time. That's why in our practice, we highly, highly individualize everything from the way we teach them how to cook, because you may be of different culture background, right? You may want specific foods on a regular basis. We definitely work with our patients for that. Remember, guys, anybody that's attending the workshop today, we will offer a 20-minute free consultation. So to answer any questions, let's say you have PCOS or any of the metabolic syndrome diseases, right, or conditions, I can at least point you in the right directions. Like, hey, try this on your next month, right? The last condition that I'll say that where I think you should seek help is if you feel like you have quote unquote plateaued. You may not have plateaued. You may not just have learned what is needed to go to the next step, right? A lot of the people, especially my people that end up somewhere around here, right, and they want to go back to here, they don't know what it takes, because at this point, they're very lean, right? They're struggling with that stubborn fat, right, as they call it. So we go over as to why they're consuming, what foods they're maybe consuming that's not letting them reach their goal, right? So like I said, that is, you guys can use this QR code to schedule in that first link that says Practice Better. You guys can use that to schedule your free consultation. That's a thank you, guys, because I want to make sure that you guys are getting right in the right direction. But I know I kind of went through the material really, really fast. Does anybody have any questions? I want to make sure that that I answer as many questions as I can with the time that we have left. The ladies were awesome. Great questions. I'm trying to think of other nuggets as questions come in. Also remember, ladies, that being in a calorie deficit does not mean you will lose fat. What determines fat loss is the composition of your macronutrients. So how much proteins, carbs, and fats you're intaking, right? Thank you guys. Thank you guys for everyone. So make sure that that's another part, and that's usually another times where people get a little stuck. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Trying to think if there's other nuggets that I can give you guys. DEXA scans. If you guys are wondering where you can find a DEXA scan, you can literally just Google DEXA scan in my area or my zip code. There are 2 types of DEXA scans nowadays that they're getting more popular. Make sure you guys get the right ones. There's usually one that just does bone density, and you will usually find these at like radiology places. Don't go to those. You want something that gives you your fat mass, your lean mass, your bone mass, right, and the water weight. So just ask them like, hey, in this test, do I get my lean mass and my fat mass in it as well? Yes. So cellulite tips, yes. So cellulite is what we call subcutaneous fat. Okay. So that's fat that's usually, pressed up against the skin, right? Because sometimes the muscle, and if you look at it, they're usually in areas where there is a muscle kind of pushing through, pushing this fat and kind of up, pressing it against us in like this, like in the thigh area, right? Or some places where fat can accumulate a lot in a small space. So think of like your triceps. Sometimes we do see a little bit of cellulite in there. So the best thing for cellulite is loose body fat. Okay. A lot of times people are like, well, I can't get rid of, my cellulite. Well, that's because you may have a higher body fat percentage, right? When you lose body fat, you will lose it all over your place, right? I'm trying to think if there's a term, you guys might have heard it, like skinny fat. Those people are very slim but have a very, very high body fat percentage and very little muscle, right? So that's where those people can also see that by losing body fat they can actually get there. But usually because of their weight, right, these people are usually low weight. We recommend that they increase their muscle mass and they decrease their fat mass as well. Yeah. If you'd like a little more guidance on that, definitely schedule that consultation, because we can definitely, like I said, we can walk you through. We can get more specifics about, like your weight, your height, your activity level, right? We go very, very into detail to see what's kind of happening, right? A lot of the times, a lot of my patients, they say they get mad throughout the process, and I say, hey, don't get mad about what you didn't know in the past. Nobody took the time to explain it to you this way in a way that you understand, right? So a lot of the times, people feel finally relieved and, kind of just like there is hope, because we're finding things that work specifically for them, right? Any other questions? Trying to think if there's any other tips that I can give you guys. Oh, water. Water is really, really, really important. If you are not drinking enough water, your body will not have your body. Let me start off with this. Your body will favor anything to keep you alive over anything that makes you look sexy. Okay. If your body needs water to make your brain work, your liver work, all these other organs work, but water is also used in the fat losing process. Water is the molecule that actually splits the body fat, okay, and makes it come out of the fat cell. If you don't drink enough water, right, your body will not be able to do this efficiently. So a lot of the times we see that people are eating the right calories, losing the right, working out their right amount of time, but they're not taking enough water. The minute they increase their water intake, they start losing more body fat. We do see that. We have seen that in practice. What is the right amount of water? Take your weight divided by 2. That's how many ounces in a day you should consume without exercise. Whatever you drink during your exercise, you don't count that. Okay, so for example, if you're 100 pounds, 50 ounces, right? If you're 155, that's 75 ounces, right? So make sure you're drinking enough water. Very, very, very important to make sure you lose body fat and do all those things. Well, if there are no other questions, you guys have been amazing. Thank you guys again for having me. Like I said, reach out for any questions. We would love to help out. And like I said, thank you again, everyone, for joining me. I appreciate it.